If you're applying to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, M7 programs, or top European schools like LBS and INSEAD, there's a good chance that the resume you built your career with is not working in your favor in the MBA application process. For those who are new to our channel, my name is Susan Bershai. I'm the founder of C Admissions, and we work with candidates targeting the most competitive MBA programs in the world. And today I'm looking at how admission committees actually read your resume, what they're evaluating, what costs a candidate ground as it relates to the application itself, and why the document that got you the job, the promotion, often needs to be rebuilt entirely for the application itself. Before we get started, if you find this insight, this information helpful, give this video a like. It tells the algorithm that this is useful information that they should share with other people who are going through the same process as you are. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We actually post original content outside of the live videos that we host on Thursdays. So you'll be notified when those videos are up as well as a subscriber. So with that, why don't we get started? I read a lot of resumes from people who should have gotten in. The credentials were there, so the firms, the trajectory, the results, all of them were on the page. And I'd sit with the document and know within the first 5 seconds that it wasn't going to do what they needed it to do based on the conversations that we had. Not because anything on the page was technically wrong, but because the whole thing was built for the wrong reader. The resume that works in a career application, essentially, when you're applying for jobs, that is designed to answer a question that is something along the lines of, can this person execute on this target job? So the job that you're applying to. Admission committees are asking a different question entirely, or they're asking different questions entirely. So multiple questions. Those are, will this person lead in the classroom, represent the program well, contribute something their classmates can't get from the 5 other candidates who come from the same firm, similar career background, than this person in front of them. Those questions are not going to get answered by a list of accomplishments and revenue figures that I so often see in this process. And a lot of the candidates going through this don't really realize until they're either holding a rejection letter with no clear explanation, of course, because none of the business schools are going to offer you an explanation, or they have offers from programs well below the caliber they're capable of, which to me, that is a huge injustice. I think that's the right word. Okay. When a recruiter reads your resume, the question is always a functional question. Can this person do the job? Your credentials exist to answer that. And if they do, the resume worked, that leads to the interview. Admission committees are doing something structurally different. They're assembling a class, right? They're reading to decide whether you'll add something to the room, intellectually, relationally, in the kind of leadership that shows up in case discussion and study group, and the relationship people carry out or carry outside of the program well beyond their 2 years in business school and throughout their career. The evaluation doesn't live in the title that you hold, or your deal metrics that you share in your resume. It lives in the evidence of how you think, how you lead, and who you are outside of work. Most career resumes were not really designed to surface any of those nuances, which makes sense. That is a different audience with different expectation. But the MBA candidates, if they apply the same structure to their MBA application, what they're doing is really doing a disservice to their own candidacy, because it's not going to lead to the results that they anticipate going in. And the instinct most candidates have is to refine, tighten the language, add more numbers, reformat the layout, and using all the blogs and all the sorts of information that you find on the internet. And that's a reasonable response to a document that doesn't perform, but it fundamentally is not solving the problem that most candidates have. What the resume needs isn't a better version of itself. It needs to be rebuilt around a different question entirely. And that changes how everything is presented to the admission committee. So when I read a resume, I can usually tell very quickly which of the 3 categories I'm looking at. And these are 3 sort of categories of resume. And the category almost always predicts the outcome before it comes through. The first is what I call the credential carrier. This resume has all the right elements. The firms are recognizable, the titles track well, there are numbers on the page, which obviously we want to know, right? You finish reading it, or I finish reading it, and I know exactly what this person has done. What I don't have is any sense of who did it. Every bullet documents an outcome. This is very, very common among MBA applicants. Now, none of those bullets show a decision. None of them show what this candidate specifically brought to the work that someone else in the same role wouldn't have brought to that work. When a committee reads this resume, they can see competence. They cannot see, however, leadership. And a lot of the candidates think that it's obvious, it's assumed, right? But when you are not clear, you cannot expect the admission team to sit there and assess what are they trying to say. They don't have time for that, right? Schools like Wharton, Harvard, competence at a name brand firm is table stakes. You are dime a dozen, right? It's not the differentiator. The second category is the process narrator. These resumes are actually harder to fix because they look thorough. Every bullet has a methodology: led cross-functional teams, collaborated with stakeholders, leverage data to drive decisions. The problem is that you finish reading it and you still don't know who was in charge of anything. This is also a very, very common way of writing. The person in this category is absent from their own resume. What you have is essentially a project brief. The methodology is documented, but the judgment, the decisions, the moments where something could have gone either way, good or bad, none of that is on the page. Obviously, I see this also very consistently with candidates in the consulting and product management who are coming from those spaces. They spent years learning to describe work in precise, objective language, and that language is the wrong context for the MBA application. The third, this is the story builder, is very, very rare that I see it come through in the initial phases. What makes this category different isn't that it's better written, it's that every entry makes something visible that the other 2 obscure. And something is that the candidate's actual judgment is on the page. You read a bullet and understand not just what happened, but what this person had to navigate, what they decided, what changed because of them specifically. A committee can build a mental model of this person from that page alone. They're not excavating, for lack of a better word, for evidence. It is right there on the page. That's a document that gets advocated for in a room of committee members making decisions, who's in and who's out, right? Most of you watching this are somewhere in the first two categories. And that's absolutely not a character flaw. It's a framing problem that a lot of you have been taught that that's how you do it. That's how you write a resume. But we need to get you to think slightly differently in more of story builder category of resume, because that is going to move you much further in where you want to go. And that's the work that we typically do here at SIA as we build your resume and other components of your application. It is about telling all the nuances of who you are through the various different pieces of the application process. Now, before I tell you a story, I want you to think about your own resume for a few seconds. You probably have a number on it that you consider your specific headline achievement, like the thing that you are most proud of, the project, the result, the things that you have led that you believe is going to make the case for the admission team to say yes to you. Hold that in mind while I walk through this, because the question I want you sitting with is, does your resume actually explain why that outcome happened because of you specifically? So why the success happened because of you? That's the question, right? So hold that question. So a product manager I worked with came in with what looked like a straightforward case. 3 years at one of the most recognized retail brands in the country, clear progression, and a number that most candidates would consider a headline achievement: 83 million in incremental revenue on a product this particular client led. On paper, the profile was very competitive, but when I read the resume, that figure was buried inside a bullet that described the project from the outside, the process, the teams involved, the outcome. Nothing about the decisions this particular candidate made to get there, nothing about the organizational resistance he navigated, nothing that would tell a committee why this outcome happened because of this candidate, rather than whoever would have taken this job, this role otherwise, right? A number without the context isn't an achievement. It's a data point, and I need you to think of it in that way. The committee reads it, notes it, moves on to the next candidate who has similar numbers on their resume and also hasn't explained why it mattered, that it was them who actually built those numbers. Now, the question I asked you to hold on to in the previous slide, does your resume explain why that outcome happened because of you? Here's how you find out. Take your most impressive bullet, read it, then ask yourself, if I replace my name with the name of a colleague who also held this role, does that bullet still work? If the answer is yes, you've described the job, not yourself in the job. And what this looks like in practice. So a product manager can write something like led redesign of the site search experience using machine learning, improving relevance and increasing conversion rates. I see this quite often in product technically focused product roles, right? Now, what that same achievement looks like when the person is in it, in the actual bullet point, it reads something more along the lines of identified that search was the highest exit point on the site and that the existing vendors could not solve it. Build the internal case, secured executive budget approval, and led the rebuild, doubling search engagement and driving 83 million in incremental revenue. Now, when I read that, I know something. I can see who this person is and what they actually did, right? You saw the movement in the work, in the words, and the choices, and the order of things here. The reason most candidates can make that shift on their own is oftentimes, honestly, very straightforward. Professional advancement doesn't require it. Performance reviews reward you for doing the job well. Promotions acknowledge expanded scope, right? Nobody in your career has ever asked you to separate what you did from what any other person, any other competent person in your role would have done. Admission committees are now asking you to do exactly that. And most resumes are built with no answer to that question on the page because they don't know how the committee, they don't really know actually that the committee is looking for it. The second test is to ask someone in your life who is intelligent and works in a completely different field than you. Not a friend at your firm, not someone in finance if you're in finance, but someone who genuinely has no context of your industry. Read them your two most important bullets. Then ask, what did I actually do and why does it matter? What most people discover is that their impact requires a conversation, requires an explanation. They find themselves saying, well, in my world, that number is significant because fill in the gaps. And that moment you need to explain what your bullet means, you've identified really the problem. Your resume was written for a reader who already understands your specific terrain. Admission committees don't share that terrain. They're career services professionals who read thousands of applications across every industry, every background, every career path imaginable. They don't need to know that minutia detailed terrain that you operate in. They're also not going to ask follow-up questions. They're going to move on to the next resume so that they can go through thousands of other applications just like yours. Now, this isn't a writing problem, and it's not something that better quote unquote phrasing is going to necessarily fix. Knowing which details translate and which ones obscure, and how to sequence information for a reader who has no industry context of where you're coming, that it's a nuanced challenge that you have to go through if you're going to put together a really strong, compelling, differentiated resume. It requires also understanding how your specific work reads to someone evaluating leadership across hundreds of different professional backgrounds. And that perspective is almost impossible to develop from inside your own career because, I mean, let's face it, you are biased because you've lived your career to date. Now, most candidates spend their energy on the work experience section of the resume, so the bullet points. They get those to a place that feels strong and consider the resume quite finished. The sections below, the extracurriculars, the community involvement, the interests, are where different kind of evaluation is happening, and most people treat them as straightforward, very quick touch points, essentially. A committee reading your resume isn't only assessing your career, they're assessing whether they'd want to spend 2 years in a classroom with you. What those lower sections reveal, or fail to reveal, depending on what's on the page, is whether you've developed beyond your professional credentials. Leadership that shows up across contexts, commitments sustained over years, not just a few months before you submitted your application, interest pursued with enough depth that they survive a follow-up question in an actual interview. When that section is thin or generic, it doesn't just underperform in isolation. It undermines also what you have written above in the employment section, because you're not treating them with equal amount of care and attention as you're developing those pieces. When I helped rebuild the resume I mentioned earlier, nothing about that client's actual career changed. Same job, same results, same involvement outside of work. What changed was what that document made actually visible. His promotion had happened mid-tenure and was essentially absent from the original resume, buried under a job title that hadn't been really updated. His LLM research project, which he had advocated for from scratch, built the internal case for and brought to the COO for budget approval before it existed as a product, was written as a feature launch with an outcome attached. The version we built told an entirely different story, one about influencing up, about cross-functional ownership, about a 83 million result that was legible because the decision making was also very much on the page. The community programs he'd built moved out of a job description that he had initially as the structure and into its own section with real scope and outcomes also included. The document that went to Stanford and Harvard wasn't a polished version of the original resume. It was a different argument made from the same evidence. What he walked into those applications, or what he submitted into those applications, is what his resume, what job he actually was doing, and he was very much present in that, in those bullet points, in those details that were shared. And most of the candidates that I see are going into the process hoping their credentials are enough, the name brands are enough, the titles are enough, those outcomes are enough. But the ones that I've seen who've had really transformative resumes that opened a lot of doors into the most competitive programs are the ones who've done this kind of work, this kind of descriptive story building exercise that I talk about, knowing that that is going to be the what differentiates them from the next person. So what I've walked through today, and I know we have about 5 minutes, so I just want to make sure that we are wrapping up and have a chance to answer also some questions. What I've walked through today is the shape of the problem, the evaluation gap, the translation challenge, what gets lost in the sections most candidates are going to also treat as secondary. What I haven't been able to tell you is whether your resume has these problems specifically, because obviously that requires looking at your resume specifically. The gap between what you believe your resume is communicating and what an Adcom reads in the first 10 seconds, 30 seconds, is almost never going to be visible from where you're sitting. You're reading it from everything you know about your own career. And obviously that's important, but it's hard for you to see what's missing. When the admission team is reading it cold against hundreds of other profiles with no reason to give you the benefit of the doubt on anything that isn't clear on your resume. Most candidates leave the gap unexplained until they have outcomes at the end of this process. The ones who are really taking the time, they find out early enough that they actually have time to do something about it. The resume building, it is a process that takes several iterations to get it right, to get that story building in it in a way that is going to differentiate you from the next person who comes in with the similar credentials to you, right? So if you're at a point where you want that honest read, where you want to understand specifically what your candidacy looks like from the outside, from someone who doesn't know you, and I'll tell you, I have so many conversations with people when I hear them talk about their experiences and what I read on their resume, it's like two different people. They're not the same, right? That if you want to know where you know get your honest read, that is a conversation for a consultation or through our consultation, and we can talk a little bit more about what is it that you're looking to do and how we can support you in this process. So the link for that is going to be either in the comments, but if you're watching this as a replay, it's going to be in the description of the replay video as well. All right, so 3 minutes left. Let's jump into questions. Let's see, do we have anyone with a question? If you have a question, just write it in the comments of whichever platform you're joining us from. So I hopefully have a chance to answer it. But if not, we will be monitoring the live on YouTube. So if you have questions, we'll be glad to answer those, that come in the next week. All right, let's go with the questions that came through the registration. What's the difference between a resume that gets me a job interview and one that gets me an MBA interview? Yeah, so what I mentioned earlier, the difference is the job interviewer understands the industry you're coming from, understands the job that you are applying for. You speak the same language, right? The admission team reading your application, the admission committee reading your application or reading your resume, does not need to know your background. And they are really assessing how you communicate, even on your resume, because let's say you are a product manager in a tech space, and your peer is a social worker who has never done anything in tech. Can you communicate to someone who is not in your space? And the way you communicate in your resume and the way you communicate in the rest of your application is a test of your ability to communicate to someone who is not in your field, right? And obviously you can go back and look at what I mentioned earlier about the MBA resume. The story building resume is always going to have a greater impact in your application than if you just have a list of bullet points that you're accustomed to doing for your job themselves, for the jobs that you have held to date. Okay, last question. If my work is confidential, how do I describe it without violating NDAs and still sounding substantive? The beauty about storytelling kind of resume, it's that you do not need to violate any NDA details. You can describe it in a way that talks about your involvement in that kind of project. And you can have it high level enough that it can be said about any particular one. So meaning you don't have to mention the companies that you're working with. It can be like high level descriptions. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule. There are nuances that you would have to take for your own specific case. But generally speaking, you don't need to violate NDA for anything that you include in there, with some exceptions, of course. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. Like I said, if you have questions that come after this live, please write them in the comments of the platform that you're watching from, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. As usual, we'll have another video for next week. If you have also any topic recommendation in terms of what do you want to hear more from us about, please write them in the comments. Also, this way, it can help really inform what we share with you guys, because it's going to be helpful to you. And that's what our intent is with these live videos. Thanks for being here, and I will see you next week. Hi, I'm Susan Barashai, founder of C Admissions. If you'd like to go deeper into MBA strategy, watch the next video here. And if you want more insights on building a standout application, click here to subscribe.